Hi, my name is Jonathan. I teach ideokinesis, embodied anatomy, trauma release, and dance. Today we're going to do some work with our bladders and kidneys. So most people don't think of moving from their organs, but I found this combo to be really powerful. If you think about where they are, I have a model pelvis here, just put it in front of my own pelvis. Go ahead and start by touching your pubic bone. So touching the pubic bone, and just behind and in there is your bladder, this sort of balloon pouch. And we're going to think about the bladder as being buoyant today. So before we get into the kidneys, go ahead and make sure you're sitting on something that's fairly firm and get sitting right on your sit bones. So I'm going to touch my pubic bone and I'm going to touch the back of my pelvis, my sacrum area, back here. Pubic bone, sacrum. I'm going to put two hands on there and I'm going to think about rocking the pubic bone down and letting the sacrum come up. And I'm not tilting my pelvis in relation to my back. I'm just letting the whole pelvis rock and it's taking my spine with it. So there should be no change in stress levels in here. There will be a little bit because as I lean forward there's more weight coming down, but I'm not actually arching my low back or curling my low back. Okay. So here we go. We're going to just imagine the pubic bone dropping and the sacrum rising, and the sacrum dropping and the pubic bone rising. Go ahead and do that a few times. You can do it with your hands like this, almost like a teeter-totter or a seesaw. And imagine the bones moving gently and fluidly, carrying the spine along. Great. Now, thinking about the bladder is just behind the pubic bone. And I'm going to do that again, but now I'm going to think about the bladder just behind the pubic bone moving with it. Right? So as the pubic bone drops, my left hand will be my bladder. So this is my bladder, my right hand is my pubic bone. They're touching, right? So you can do that. As I drop forward, the pubic bone drops and the bladder will go with it. And the pubic bone rises and the bladder goes with it. And now I'm going to suggest alternate imagery. And this gets really fun because now you can think about your organs as initiating movement and moving within your body. I'm going to think of the bladder, my left hand, moving opposite the motion of the pubic bone. So they're both moving down and forward, but the bladder is going to move relative to the pubic bone a little bit upwards. So it's like it's falling down but rising up with a little buoyant energy. Right? And then when it drops back down, the bladder is going to rest back down in the body. So it's as though the pubic bone is exposing the bladder a little bit. The bladder is still going down, but it's just rising up a little bit. It's like pulling a helium balloon down and then lifting back up as the helium balloon drops. And then pulling the helium balloon down as the balloon rises, and then allowing the helium balloon to be covered once again. So go ahead and try that. I'm going to think of the bladder rising, even as it falls, and the bladder dropping. And the bladder rising, and the bladder dropping. Bladder rising, and the bladder dropping. And then think about the pubic bone dropping in front of the rising bladder, and the pubic bone rising in front of the dropping bladder. So the pubic bone drops in front of the rising bladder, and the pubic bone rises in front of the dropping bladder. Go ahead and stand up. You can imagine as you bend your legs, the bladder's rising, and just like, almost like a balloon that I'm trying to push down in the water, pushing the balloon down in the water, and it's rising up. So it's going down, but I'm feeling that buoyant upwards lift. And think about that as helping you jump. Just like when you push a balloon down into the water, see if you can find buoyancy from your bladder. And then don't think about your bladder. Just go back to thinking about your pelvis. You can shake it out, or you can just think about jumping without focusing on the anatomy, and you might feel that somehow, in some weird kind of way, when you use the bladder imagery, you're a little more light, you're a little more buoyant, you're a little more soft. Great. So, the kidneys connect to the bladder via the ureters. So to find the kidneys, you want to touch the back of your rib cage, the bottom part. So just find that area, give it a little rub, give it a little movement. This is going to move the kidneys inside your body, or you could say your body is moving from the movement of your kidneys. Either perspective is valid. And the kidneys are about half below the ribs and half exposed. So they're half behind the ribs and half below, and they have tubes that connect down into the bladder to filter the urine, let it move out of the body through the urethra. So, as I think about my kidneys, I'm going to rub my back a little bit, and I'm going to think about a little bit of heat moving into there. I'm going to rub and I'm going to move, and I'm going to think about the kidneys moving underneath the rib cage. And I'm going to think about those ureters running down to the bladder. So I'm going to touch my bladder a little bit, just tap my bladder, just lightly, and then I'm going to tap my kidneys. And I'm going to imagine that triangle relationship. And what's going to happen to that triangle relationship when I say twist? Naturally, the left kidney will move forward as it turns to the left, the right kidney will move back, and the bladder will maybe stay about the same. Maybe it will move a little bit inside the pubic bone, right? So maybe the pubic bone stays, or maybe it even moves a little, and the bladder turns a little bit inside the pubic bone. So I'm imagining this triangle shifting inside my body, and then the kidneys swing back with the connection to the bladder, and the kidneys swing to the left, tugging the bladder a little bit inside the pubic bone, and they swing back. Maybe I can bend to the side, right? My right kidney will drop, my left kidney will rise, the ureter will be stretched a little bit more, maybe there's a little bit of a tug in my bladder, and then I drop back down, and I rise with a little bit of a stretch or a tug in my ureter, my right kidney rising, and my bladder staying low. And then I could think about the kidneys as being hot air balloons that are tethered down into my bladder. So my bladder is buoyant, and then also my kidneys are buoyant. So for now, I'll think of the bladder as being the root of this, right? So maybe it still has this floating essence, but it's rooted down, and I can feel the relationship of the bladder to my butt, to the chair I'm sitting on. And as I bend, the kidneys are maybe being taken by a wind, right? A big wind is rising this way, and the kidneys are blowing, just like a tree on a mountain going, whoosh, right? And the kidneys are blowing, and the bladder is keeping them in relation and rooted. And go ahead and try to explore your movement while feeling that relationship. The rooted bladder and the floating, drifting, energized, upward soaring kidneys. What does it feel like to imagine all your movement being filtered through or in relationship to the rootedness of the bladder? It's amazing. So think about your whole body as sort of being dimmed, except for the bladder, ureters, and kidneys. So they're like glowing brightly inside a sort of dimmed body, and all your movement is coming from that relationship. And you can add, maybe they are like seaweed, and they're rooted in the bottom of a river, and the water is flowing past, and it's eddying, and it's coming back, and it's going forward, and it's taking those kidneys and ureters and bladder in all different directions, and the rest of the body is just along for the ride. All right. If you're anything like me, you'll find that this feels really good. And if you've ever studied dance or movement, you might find that thinking about your internal relationships can give you more connectivity inside your body, more integration, more power, more just like buoyancy, ease of movement. It's absolutely amazing. We have disregarded the relationship of the organs in the Western mode of the world, something they never did in Eastern thought, in Qigong or Tai Chi or ancient Taoism that was aimed at health practices. And I really believe that our posture and our movement comes from our organs almost more than it comes from our bones and muscles. That the bones and muscles sort of respond to the organs. But the weakness and the tension in our muscles can often always be traced back to weakness of the organs. So go ahead and try to move, try to experiment this week and see what it feels like to move through the world as a kidney, ureter, bladder, triangular relationship. Thanks a lot.